Okay. We'll be discussing Module 2. That is all about interest rates, determination, and structure. So that will be the Module 2. And for the subtype topics, we'll be discussing interest rate determination, how we determine the interest rate, what are the structures of interest rates, what are the term structure of interest rate, and theories of term structure of interest rates. Okay? Wait lang, mag-a-admit lang ulit ako ha. Pinapasok pa. Okay, so for the interest rate determination, so basically class, no, financing at pati yung investing, no, pag nag-finance tayo and at the same time nag-invest tayo, it requires sound decision making. So kailangan talaga may matalinong evaluation, kailangan na-weigh natin, no, yung pros and cons, what would be the effect in our life, pati kung ano ba yung mga magiging implications. And that is kailangan meron tayong discernment. Since siya ay dynamic, when we say dynamic ng financial environment, ito ay active, pabago-bago, at ito ay hindi constant lang. Okay? At ito ay kailangan makita at maintindihan ng mga market participants. So when we say market participants class, by the way, this is joint class ha. We have BSMA, second year, section A and section B. Okay? So tuloy ko lang ha. So pag sinabing market participants, ito yung sinasabi nating buyers and sellers, nagkakaroon sila ng business or they transact business with each other in the principal market for an asset or liability. So there is a transaction between the buyers and the sellers at ang tawag sa kanila is the market participants. Importanteng maunawaan natin, maintindihan natin 2A and 2B kung ano nga ba ang interest rates. Okay? At interest rates is paano natin malalaman kung ito ba ay as one of the key aspects of the financial environment or ano ba yung mga kailangan pa nating malaman when it comes to interest rate. Okay? Let's talk about the rate of interest. Okay? The interest rate is a rate of return paid by a borrower of funds to a lender of them or a price paid by a borrower for a service, the right to make use of funds for a specific period. So pag sinabing rate, of course, ito yung balik sa atin. Thus, pag sinabing rate of interest, this is one form of yield on financial instrument. When we say yield, of course, it could be income. Pwede natin siyang i-treat as return or profit. Okay? Pagdating sa financial instruments. Okay. So we have two questions being raised by market participants pag pinag-uusapan natin ng interest rate. Number one, no? Ano bang nagde-determine sa average rate of interest sa economy natin? And pangalawang tanong, why do interest rates differ on different types and lengths of loans and debt instruments? So paano nga ba? Ano at bakit? Okay? Yan yung dalawang tanong na kailangan nating tingnan. Interest rates vary depending on borrowing or lending decision. Paano nangyari? Class. Example, ulitin ko ha. Interest rates vary depending on borrowing or lending decision. Example nito, wait lang. Ayan, nag-admit lang ako. Example, there is interest rate, may interest rate kapag ang bangko ay kapag nagpapautang. Okay? Interest rate ang tawag doon.
Yung bunso lang.
Ang tawag doon, no? Kapag nagpapautang ang bangko.
Okay, klasa sa kahit sa mga pumunta lang may favorite sa akin.
Okay, tuloy ko lang, class. Yan. Again, balikan ko. Example. Sabi na, depende sa borrowing or lending decision. Example natin, case on point is, halimbawa, ang bangko ay nagpautang. In case bank would be lend, no? So, ang tawag doon, sa interest na rate na yun is the offer rate. Kasi sila yung nagpapautang. Ano yung interest rate? Ano yung ino-offer nilang rate? And the second one, the interest rate they are paying for depositors. Di ba may mga depositors, may mga kliyente na meron tayong savings account, may current, meron tayong manager's check, halimbawa may ganun. Ano? So meron tayong checking account. So ang binibigay naman sa atin as depositor, interest rate na ang tawag is bid rate. Okay? The offer rate is doon sa nangungutang, and the bid rate, yun yung binibigay sa atin as depositor. So ibig sabihin, interest yun na binibigay sa atin. Okay? The difference, anong difference ng dalawa? Between the offer rate and the bid rate. Class. Difference between that, between the two is called a spread. Spread, as in spread. S-P-R-E-A-D. Okay? Ibig sabihin nun, pag sinabing spread, that's the definition of a spread or a bank spread, the difference between the interest rate that a bank charges a borrower and the interest rate a bank pays a depositor. Tinatawag din itong, yung sinasabi natin bank spread, tinatawag din natin itong net interest spread. Bakit? Kasi nga, the bank spread is a percentage that tells someone how much money the bank earns versus how much it gives out. Okay? Yun yung sinasabi nating bank spread. Tuloy ko lang ha. Okay. Yung sinasabi nating bank spread, of course, nag-e-exist din yan between the selling and buying rates in local and international market, international money and capital markets. So ano ibig sabihin? The spread between offer and bid rates, magkaiba yung class ha, it provides a cover for administrative costs of financial intermediaries and includes their profit. Okay? The spread is influenced by the degree of competition among financial institutions. Okay? Halimbawa, class, sa short-term international money market, sa short-term international money market, yung bank spread na yan ay mas mababa, kung, there is a considerable competition. Siyempre, kung mas maraming kompetensya, marami kayong rival, mas mababa ang spread, ang bank spread. However, basically yung tinatawag nating bank spread between banks borrowing and lending rates, magkaiba yun, di ba? May dalawa tayong type. And lending rates to their retail customer, mas malaki siya in general. Bakit? Kasi nga, we have to consider larger degree of loan default risk. Ibig sabihin, class, yung lending rate, yung ino-offer natin or yung asking rate natin would always includes a premium, a risk premium. Okay? So, anong ibig sabihin ng risk premium? Pag sinabing risk premium, class, it is an investment return, return an asset and it's expected to yield, or mag-profit tayo, kung may return tayo, in excess of the risk-free rate of return. Halimbawa, as investor, halimbawa tayo investor, we are expecting na mako-compensate tayo. Bakit? Bakit kailangan makompensate? Kasi may risk tayong in-undertake, may risk tayong kinuha. Diba? We took the risk nung tayo ay nag-invest and comes in the form of risk premium. So yun yung in return, yun ang makukuha natin. So paano naman ang computation ng risk premium? Okay? Risk premium is equivalent to estimated return. Okay? Risk premium is equivalent to estimated return minus the return on a risk-free investment. Risk-free investment ay at least of course wala siyang risk kasi nga mababa lang, mababa yung tinitingnan nating mga risk. For example, class, bigyan ko kayo ng example ha. If the estimated return on investment is 6%, okay? Halimbawa, 6% makikita natin, teka, tingnan natin yung ROI, mag-i-invest ako, magbibigay ako sa inyo ng, magde-deposit ako, but ang tingin ko, according to my analysis and my study, my ROI is 6%. And yung risk-free rate na makikita ko dyan at nakita ko is only 2%. So minus natin, i-minus natin, so we have the risk premium of 4%. Ibig sabihin, class, yung 4% na yon, yun ang amount natin, yun ang ine-expect natin or we are hoping as an investor na makuha natin, ma-earn or mag-gain natin for making a very risky investment. Okay? So meron naman, that is what we call risk premium. Okay? Of course, there are several factors na nagde-determine dun sa risk premium for a government security as no in comparison with the government security of the same maturity. So ano-ano yon? Number one, the perceived creditworthiness of the issuer. Next is the provisions of security such as a conversion provision, call provision, put provision, interest taxes, and number three, expected liquidity of a securities issue. So yung creditworthiness, ano ba ang creditworthy, anong credit standing? Provision for securities, and the other one is gaano ka-liquid, no? Expected liquidity of a securities issue. Ito ba ay less liquid, talagang ma-convert natin into cash? Okay? So tingnan natin siya. Ano? So ang question naman, upon hearing all those three, no? All those three, ang question natin is, paano? What are the determinants? Paano natin ma-determine, class, yung interest rate in general? Okay, paano nga? So, ibig sabihin, class, as per my literature, now, the economic theory assumes there is some particular interest rates as a representative of all interest rates in the economy. Such an interest rate usually depends upon the topic considered and can be represented by, example is interest rate on government short-term or long-term debt, or the base interest rate of the interest of the commercial banks or a short-term money market. Okay? Example yon. So sa ganitong pagkakataon, in this scenario class, ang assumption natin ay ang interest rate structure ay stable. In this case stable. Ibig sabihin ng stable class, yung interest rate, lahat ng interest rate in the economy ay likely to move in the same direction. That means not fluctuating, walang uncertainty kasi nga stable siya. Okay? The rates, in addition class, no, yung mga rates ng interest no, na binigay ng financial institutions are nominal rates. Ibig sabihin ng nominal rate class, no, yung interest rate na ito, no, ito yung computation bago, no, before taking inflation into account. So, hindi na-consider yung inflation. Okay? And of course, these are used to calculate interest payments to borrower and lenders. Kaya lang, class, no, the loan repayments remain the same in money terms and make up a smaller and smaller proportion of the borrower's income. Okay? Next slide. The real cost of the interest payments ay liliit. Paunti ng paunti siya over time, no? That is why yun yung tinatawag nating real interest rate. In real interest rate example is the rate of interest adjusted to take into account the rate of inflation. Doon sa nominal rate, wala pa, hindi pa na-consider ang inflation. But here, in real interest rate, of course, we have taken account the inflation. Kung hindi, ayan, okay. When there is uncertainty, class, no, kung hindi tayo sigurado, ang lender sa real, kung hindi sigurado ang lender sa real rate of return na marireceive nila, that particular lender will be persuaded to lend at fixed interest rates for short term. Gagawa na lang nila, mag-uusap na lang, sige, i-fixed interest rate na lang natin ito. Total, ito naman ay short term. We're not certain, hindi tayo sigurado, no? Hindi tayo sigurado dun sa real rate of return kung ano ang makikita at marireceive natin. So that means the loan will be rolled over. Ibig sabihin, the new set rate of interest magre-reflect siya to reflect changes in the expected rate of inflation. On the other hand, class, lenders can set a floating interest rate which is adjusted to the inflation rate changes. Okay? So the dependence between the real and the nominal interest rates ay mai-express natin during using the following equation. Kita nyo ba, class? Yan. Ulitin ko ha, ang real interest rate, the real interest rate, class, this refers to the difference between the nominal rate of interest and of course yung expected rate of inflation natin. Pag sinabi namang nominal interest rate, hindi natin i-consider ang inflation. So, in this particular slide, nandito yung ating equation. So, wherein I is the nominal rate of interest, R is the real rate of interest, and the other one is the expected rate of inflation. Let's have an example, class. Kita nyo ba? Kita nyo?
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ayan, sige. Wait lang, palalakihin ko lang yung sa akin, ha? Okay. Example. Okay. Assume that the bank is providing a company with a loan of 1,000 pesos. So, pwede tayo mag-loan as a company ng 1,000 pesos. Peso for 1 year at a real rate of interest of 3%. Meron tayong 3%. However, no, at the end of the year, we are expecting to receive back 1,030 pesos. Ang galing kasi nga may 3% interest rate. Peso of purchasing power at current prices. However, kung ang bangko ay mag-expect ng 10% of inflation over the next year, consider na natin ang 10% inflation, it will want 1,133 pesos back. Bakit naging ganon? Because of the 10% above the 3%. So the interest rate required by the bank would be 13.3%. Okay? So kapag sinimplify natin siya, class, no, ang equation, the real rate of return would be 13.3%, 133%. Okay? 13.3%. Okay? So of course, iba, ulitin ko, iba yung nominal, iba yung real interest rate. In continuation, borrowers and lenders, of course, dalawa yan lagi, they are thinking mostly in terms of real interest rate. Bakit? Bakit real interest rate? Kasi ito yung mismo katotohanan. Hindi yung mag-iisip pa tayo, hindi pa magre-recompute ulit, no? Pag sinabing nominal rate lang. There are two economic theories explaining the level of real interest rates in the economy. Number one, no, may dalawa tayong basis for the theory. Number one is the loanable funds theory. And number two is the liquidity preference theory. Pag sinabi, class, na loanable funds theory, no, sa economy natin, laging merong supply loanable funds. Like, for example, yung sinasabi nating utang, that's the credit. No? Loanable funds na nasa capital market, no, na halimbawa, for example, nasa household, nasa business entity, nasa gobyerno. So kung halimbawa, mas mataas ang level ng interest rate, class, ito lang yung tatandaan natin, ha. Kung mas mataas ang level ng interest rate, of course, mas maraming entity like household, business, government, mas maraming entity ang willing magpautang o magbigay ng loan funds kasi mataas ang level ng interest rate. Okay? Pero kung mas mababa naman ang level ng interest, of course, the less they are willing to supply. Kasi parang nagbi-business din ako. So kailangan, no, igagrab ko ang opportunity kung ako yung capital market, na igagrab ko yung opportunity na mas mataas ang level ng interest rate. So that would be the best time na ako ay makapagbigay ng loan funds, makapag-offer sa market ng funds. Okay? The same entities yung sinasabi ko kanina, it could be household, it could be government, it could be business entities, no? they can demand loanable funds. Okay? Demanding more when the level of interest rates are low and less when interest rates are higher. So ano yung pwedeng i-demand? That is what we call loanable funds. The extent to which people are willing to postpone consumption depends upon their time preference. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng loanable funds, class? Ibig sabihin no, ng loanable funds, it's the sum of money na ino-offer ng lending, no? Ito yung kabuuan ng pera na ino-offer para makapagbigay kayo o para makapagpautang. And this is demanded, of course, by consumer and investor only during a given period of time. Okay? So, yung interest rate in this model dito sa loanable funds theory ay pwedeng i-determine, pwedeng i-check, pwedeng identify, no, by means of interaction between potential borrowers and potential savers. Okay, sa kanila nakasalalay. Okay? The loanable funds theory, dito pa rin tayo sa loanable funds theory, of course, it was formulated by the Swedish economist si Nat Wicksell in the 1900s. According to Nat Wicksell, the level of interest rates is determined by the supply and demand of loanable funds available in an economist credit market. Okay? Yan. Wait lang ha. Okay. So, ibig sabihin class, no, pag titingnan natin siya as per the definition, loanable funds theory suggests, no, sinasuggest ito na investment and savings dito, no, in the economy per se, would determine the level of long-term interest rates. However, paano naman po ang short-term? Kasi pinag-usapan natin long-term. Pag sinabi namang short-term interest rates class, no, on the other hand, ito naman, ang nagde-determine naman ito ay ang ating economy's financial and monetary conditions. Okay? Still on loanable funds theory, according to this theory for the economy as a whole, no, ibig sabihin, para makita natin ang demand for loanable funds, no, this is the equation. It's equivalent to net investment plus net additions to liquid reserves. Okay, ulitin ko, for us to check the demand for loanable funds, it is equivalent to net investments and net additions to liquid reserves. Examples class ng liquid reserves. Well, liquid reserves, ibig sabihin, di ba, mas mabilis siyang ma-convert into cash. Pwede siyang cash, of course, marketable securities, ano pa ba? Examples pa ng liquid reserves ay net receivables na pwedeng agad-agad, as in easily, mako-convert natin sa cash. And the other one, no? And the other one is supply of loanable funds. It is equivalent naman to net savings plus increase in the money supply. Okay? Of course, pag tinignan natin, no, pag nakita natin yung importansya ng loanable funds, and of course, yung major suppliers ng loanable funds, makikita natin sila ay commercial banks. So the key role of this financial intermediary, the commercial banks, in the determination of interest rates ay napaka-clear. Okay? Bakit? Meron tayong example class ha, in the Philippines, meron tayong Bangko Sentral. That is our central bank at sila ang nag-i-implement ng monetary policy. Do you agree with me?
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay. So therefore, class, thank you so much. Therefore, si Bangko Sentral, siya yung entity, no, that would influence the supply of loanable funds from sa commercial bank, and thereby it changes the level of interest rate. So depende kay Bangko Sentral. However, ito yung scenario class. Kung ang central bank ay magi-increase ng supply ng credit, no, available siya sa commercial bank, what would be the effect? The central bank would decrease the level of interest rate. Okay, ulitin ko. if the central bank increases the supply of credit available doon sa commercial bank, it follows, magdi-decrease ang level ng interest rate. Kaya lang, class, on the other hand, again, kung ang central bank naman natin o Bangko Sentral ay magdi-decrease, babawasan ang supply ng credit available sa mga commercial bank, the effect would be mag-i-increase ang level ng interest rate. Baliktad yun. Okay? So number 2, punta tayo sa interest rate theory again, that is liquidity preference theory. J.M. Keynes has proposed a simple model which explains how interest rates are determined based on the preferences of household to hold money balances rather than spending or investing those funds. Okay? Ibig sabihin, class, now money balances can be held in the form of currency or checking account. But then, alam naman natin na very low ang interest or no interest talaga. Kung ikaw ay may money, kung ikaw ay may pera, di ba? Or ikaw ay may checking account, ang interest rate ay talagang hindi mo mararamdaman. So what is the key element dito, class? Sa theory natin na liquidity preference theory. Ang key element dito is the motivation na ang individual tayo, no? If we are holding money balance despite the loss of interest income. Ibig sabihin, class, no? Kasi ang pera in financial markets, no? Yung money kasi is of course the most liquid of all financial assets kasi mabilis, 'di ba? Mabilis siya. Mabilis siyang ito na yun hindi mo na para i-convert pa ulit sa cash kasi ito na ngayon, ito na yung pera mo. And of course, no, it can be easily utilized to consume or invest. Kung ikaw ay may pera, of course you can consume it, you can use it for investment. So yung quantity ng pera na meron tayo, kung magkano pera na meron ang tao o tayo, ay of course nakadepende sa level ng income. Lagi naman ganun. Level ng income, level ng investment, level ng profit, no? And at the end of the day, no, pagdating naman sa ekonomiya, no, ang demand naman for money is directly related to an economist income. Okay? So of course, ulitin ko, yung quantity ng pera, kung gaano karami ang pera natin, of course, nakadepende yon sa level ng ating profit, sa level ng income. But for the ekonomiya, no, titingnan natin na ang demand naman ng kaperahan is directly related naman. Saan? Sa kita ng economy per se. Okay? Of course, pinag-uusapan natin, lagi natin pinag-uusapan itong mga theory na to, liquidity preference theory. But of course, there is a trade-off, no? Trade-off between holding money balance for the purposes of maintaining liquidity and investing or lending funds in less liquid debt instruments in order to earn a competitive market interest rate. Okay, so the difference in the interest rate can be earned by investing in interest-bearing debt instruments, and money balances represents an opportunity cost for maintaining liquidity. Okay? Ibig sabihin, plus, the lower the opportunity cost, no, the greater the demand for money balances. But then, the higher the opportunity cost, mas mababa ang demand for money balance. Again, ano nga yung ibig sabihin ng money balance? Plus? What do you mean by money balance? Plus, may kausap pa ako? In your own understanding, what is money balance? Ha?
Ma'am, try ko po.
Sige na.
Parang ano po, yung tamang pag-ikot ng pera po dun sa economy po, dun sa mga participants po from household to yung mga kaugnay pong participants ng economy po.
Okay. Thank you so much. Pag sinabing money balance, di ba halimbawa class, meron kayong allowance, no? kunyari 500 per day ang allowance natin. No? Binawasan mo na siya, nanood ka ng sine. For example, magkano ba ang sine ngayon, class? Alam nyo? Kunyari, ano na lang, hindi ko alam sorry ha, hindi kasi ako nanonood. Halimbawa, 200. I don't know kung 200 talaga. So, magkano na lang yung balance natin?
300 po.
300. Okay. So, ibig sabihin, class, that's the amount of money, no, na meron tayo at a particular time. So, yun yung money balance. Balik ako dun sa pinag-uusapan natin, ha? So, pag sinabing money balance, class, of course, ito yung may hawak ng individual, hawak ng company, o hawak ninyo mismo. Okay? So, it could be, again, pwede siyang in the form of currency, kung ikaw may dollars, kung ikaw ay may peso, may euro, pwede rin cheque, di ba? So, pwede siya. No, kaya lang, pag ang tinatanong kasi natin is, teka lang, interest kasi yung pinag-uusapan natin. Kapag ikaw ay may pera sa bangko, mas parang konti lang, hindi naman mas, or parang konti lang talaga yung interest rate natin na makukuha, or minsan, wala talaga. Wala. Lalo na class kung halimbawa, konting-konti lang yung sa ano namin, yung sa payroll, yun, halos hindi mo maramdaman. Okay? Ayan. So according to the liquidity preference theory, dito sa pangalawang theory natin, yung level of interest rates ay it could be determined by the supply and demand for money balances. So again, level ng interest rate depende, no? Paano tayo makakapag-identify ng level ng interest rate? Of course, we have to consider the supply and demand for money balances. The money supply is, of course, kinokontrol yan by the policy tools. Na sino ang nagre-regulate ng policy? Of course, ang ating Bangko Sentral. And in the loan funds theory, no, the level of interest rate, again, uulitin ko, no, dinedetermine siya ng supply and demand for money balances. Let's go to subtopic number 2, the structure of interest rate. Okay? The variety of interest rates that exist in the economy and the structure of interest rates is subject to considerable change due to different factors. Okay, tingnan natin kung ano yung mga factors. Number 1, difference in time period. Number 2, of course, degree ng risk. The higher the degree, no, or the lower the risk ng degree, no, and the transaction costs associated with different financial instruments. Ito yung sinasabi natin administrative costs. Okay? So, ibig sabihin, no, kung mas malaki yung risk ng default associated with an asset, syempre, no, it follows na mas mataas na yung interest na maibibigay as compensation for the risk. Ito yung reason plus, ito yung dahilan kung bakit ang ibang borrowers ay mas mataas ang binabayarang interest rates kaysa sa ibang borrowers. Kasi nga, plus, no, the higher the interest, no, ay mas malaki yung compensation na binibigay sa atin. Para siya yung sinasabi natin premium risk or risk premium class. Okay? In continuation, the degree of risk associated with the request for a loan may be determined based upon, number 1, no, company size, profitability, or past performance ng kumpanya. And also, pwede rin ma-determine more formally by credit rating agencies. Okay ba ang credit rating mo? Okay lang, ikaw ba ay okay yung, kumbaga tayo ay sa world market, ang World Bank, ang Pilipinas ba ay ano na ang credit rating? AAA pa rin ba? Okay, we'll see. Borrowers with high credit rating, halimbawa tayo, no? If we have high credit ratings, of course, more favorable tayo kaysa sa may low credit rating, di ba? Kaya nga, kung kayo ay may credit card, kung kayo may mga loan, kung kayo ay may mga binabayarang bills, we have to religiously pay, no, and settle our obligations para sa susunod, in good credit standing pa rin tayo and wala tayong magiging concern kung tayo ay maglo-loan. Lalo na kung nasa government ang paglo-loan na natin. Okay? So borrowers, yung mga borrowers katulad natin na may high credit rating, of course, will be able to have commercial deals accepted by banks. Okay? And they find willing takers for their commercial paper or borrow directly from banks at a lower rates of interest. Bakit? Kasi nga class, no? Kasi nga tayo ay may good credit standing. Ibig sabihin, the banks or sino man ang magpapautang sa atin, they have high trust and confidence na we will pay and we will settle our obligations. Okay? Katulad ng ang mga borrower, kung may high credit standing or credit rating, tinatawag din silang prime borrowers. Parang ang sarap. No? Kaya lang, as much as possible, hindi tayo iwasan. No? Iwasan natin mangutang kung hindi natin kayang magbayad. Okay? Let's move to term structure of interest rates. Ano naman ito? Ito yung sinasabi nating relationship between the yields or profit or income ito on comparable securities but different maturities. Ano yung sinasabi nating comparable securities class? Yung securities na sinasabi dito, example natin class ha, pwede siyang stocks, pwedeng bonds, no? Yung stocks and bonds or securities na sinasabi dyan class, ito yung mga financial instruments na, no, na may value at pwedeng bilhin, pwedeng ibenta, at pwedeng i-exchange or i-trade. Okay? Ang primary focus class, no, sa term structure of interest rates ay ang treasury market. Okay? So what would be the relationship between the yield on treasury securities with different maturities? Ito ay nakikita as the yield curve. Ano ibig sabihin ng yield curve class? No? Yield curve, ibig sabihin ito yung nagpapakita sa atin ng relationship between the interest rates payable on bonds with different lengths of time to maturity. Alam niyo naman yung maturity. Class, alam niyo yung maturity? Class?
Ma'am, yung yun po yung period na magmamature na po yung utang po, parang ganun po.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Okay, and of course, no, the maturity spread is also referred as yield curve spread. So, ibig sabihin, class, na ang focus ng treasury yield curve functions ay due mainly because of the role as a benchmark for setting yields in many other sectors of the debt market. Kaya lang, class, no, on the second thought, yung treasury yield curve, nagbe-base siya sa observed yields on the treasury market. Of course, kung ikaw ay ibabase mo lang doon sa observations natin, doon sa treasury market, it is very unsatisfactory measure doon sa relation ng yield and maturity. Bakit? It's very unsatisfactory. Bakit? Bakit class? Kasi no, yung mga securities with the same maturity, pwede silang mag-provide ng different yield. Hindi lang basta-basta observed yields ang titingnan natin. Bakit? Kasi may pagkakataon no, mas malamang sa malamang, no, magkakaroon ng different yields kasi nga na-observe mo lang siya, wala tayong scientific basis. So ano ang mas maganda? Ano ang better? Which is better class? Mas maganda at it's very necessary for me class, mas magandang mag-develop tayo ng more accurate and reliable estimates doon pagdating sa treasury yield curve. It's based on, of course, calculated risk at hindi more on gut feel lang. Of course, it is important para ma-estimate din natin, class, yung theoretical interest rate na kung saan the treasury would have to pay assuming that the security it issued is a zero coupon security. Meron tayong premise ha, kailangan no, yung security issued no, na in-issue sa atin or in-issue ay of course papatak siya sa zero coupon security. Ano bang ibig sabihin? For example, ng zero coupon security. No, example nito class is zero coupon bonds. No, ito yung mga bonds na walang interest no during the life ng bonds. But instead, class, in investors, halimbawa kayong investor, we would opt to buy zero coupon bonds, of course, at a deep discount from their face value. Ibig sabihin, yung amount which is the amount the investor will receive when the bond matures or comes due. Okay? Paano naman class, no? Yan. If the term structure is plotted at a given point in time, tingnan natin, based on the yield to maturity, double check ang maturity or the spot rate, at successive maturities against maturity, one of the three shapes of the yield curve would be observed. Tatlo yan. Tatlong yield curve ang pinag-uusapan natin dyan. We have upward sloping yield curve, downward sloping yield curve, and flat yield curve. Okay? Ibig sabihin, class, no, pag sinabi natin upward sloping yield curve, that's number 1, or ang tawag din dyan ay positively sloped yield curve. Itong uri na to, itong type ng yield curve na to, ibig sabihin, kapag ang yield ay nag-increase with maturity, ang tawag dyan ay positively sloped curve. Pag downward naman, no, downward sloping or inverted yield curve, no, ang situation dito is yields in general decline as maturity increases. But sa pag sinabi namang flat yield curve, no, there is a little difference between between short-term and long-term rates pag pinag-usapan na ang bonds na may the same parehong credit quality. Okay? Basically, class, ito lang ang explanation. Kapag ang yield curve ay naging sharp or it steepens, no, the banks are able to borrow money, no, sa mas mababang interest rate at ipapahiram naman ang pera sa mas mataas na interest rate. Okay? Doon naman sa kabilang banda, kung ang curve ay flatter, no, ang bangko naman, anong gagawin ng bangko? They will find yung kanilang margin, squeeze nila siya. So in effect, no, they may deter lending or madi-discourage silang magpautang. Okay, ulitin ko. Kapag ang yield curve ay naging sharp or it steepens, ang mga bangko talagang tawag dito, very open sa kanila, talagang sila ay magbibigay or magpapahiram, no, they will be able to borrow money, hihiram, at a lower interest rate. And at the same time, lower yung interest rate na nakuha nila, pero ipapahiram naman nila yung perang hiniram din nila at a higher interest rate. Kaya lang kung flat naman, no, kung flat naman yung curve na sinasabi natin, yung flat yield curve, no, ang mga bangko naman, no, they will find their margins squeezed. So, ibig sabihin, no, ang effect niya, ang implication, ay teka lang, no, flat yung curve. Hindi muna ako magpapahiram. Ayoko munang magpautang kasi walang balik sa akin as a financial institution. Okay? So, we have theories of term structure of interest rates. We have several major economic theories that explains the observed shapes of the yield curve. Number 1, we have pure expectations theory. Number 2, liquidity premium theory. 3, market segmentation theory. And number 4, preferred habitat theory. We have 4 theories. So number 1 is pure expectations theory or expectations theory. This theory assumes that investors are indifferent between investing for a long period on the one hand and investing for a shorter period with a view to reinvesting the principal plus interest on the other hand. Bigyan natin yan ng example class. Okay? Halimbawa, si Sofia. Yan. Si Sofia ay investor. No? Siya ay investor. Wala siyang wala siyang preference. Ibig sabihin, bahala na, okay lang sa akin o okay lang kay Sofia. Tingnan natin, wala siyang pine-prefer or anong Tagalog sa prefer class? Sorry ha. Mas gusto? Anong Tagalog sa prefer? Sorry.
Pinipili.
Ayun, good job. Thank you. Nauubusan ako. Yan. Wala siyang pinipili class, no? It's either a-avail ba siya ng 12-month deposit or 6-month deposit na lang. No? Okay lang sa kanya. Kasi kung ang pipiliin niya is 6-month deposit, no, meron naman kasi siyang nakikitang option na mag-reinvest pa ulit for another 6 months. Magde-deposit ulit siya as long as the expected interest receipts are the same. Pareho lang, no? It's either 12 months or sige, tingnan natin kung 6 months. Pero may option naman ako na itutuloy ko pa hanggang maka 12 months yung option kong 6-month deposit. So this is equivalent, si Sofia, itong scenario ni Sofia, equivalent to saying na yung pure expectations theory, there is an assumption that the investor, si Sofia as an investor, treat alternative maturities as perfect substitute for one another. Okay? So walang lugi, kumbaga. Pareho lang. It's a win-win situation for the investor. Basically, class, we can say na dito sa pure expectations theory, pwede nating sabihin ng isang investor ay risk neutral. Okay? Ano ibig sabihin ng risk neutral? Pag sinabing risk neutral, class, kung ikaw ay investor, hindi ka after kung may possibility ng expected interest rate will prove to be incorrect. Okay? Hindi ka okay lang sa'yo. Okay lang. As long, ito na naman yung premise, as long as yung potential favorable deviations from expectations are likely as unfavorable ones. Dito, class, we can say na yung risk na papasukin ni Sofia as an investor, ito yung sinasabi natin hindi naman regarded negatively. So, hindi siya negative. Kasi pareho lang, di ba? So, pareho lang perfect substitutes doon sa isa doon sa dalawang options. But then again, class, laging may then again, laging meron tayong another side of the coin, kumbaga. Most investors, halos lahat ng investors are risk averse. When we say risk averse, no, pag sinabi risk averse, kung ako ang investor, I prefer, ewan ko sa inyo, tingnan nyo kung ganito din kayo ha. Kung ako ang ay sinasabing risk averse investor, I prefer, mas gusto ko may lower return, no? Pero alam ko yung risk. Okay? Kaysa sa, yung risk na papasukin ko, kaysa mataas nga yung return, mataas yung balik sa akin, pero hindi ko alam. It's very unknown risk. So masyadong risky. Hindi ko alam. Wala akong idea kung anong risk yung pinapasok ko. Okay? Ulitin ko. Pag sinabi natin risk-averse investor class, for example, si Sofia ito. Sofia, example lang ha. Siya yung mas gusto ni Sofia na, teka lang, okay lang mas maliit ang balik, pero alam ko naman yung risk, nakalkula ko na. Okay? Calculated risk ko na, napag-aralan ko na. Kaysa sa mataas na ang balik, pero teka, so risky, hindi ko alam kung ano itong pinapasok ko. So pag ikaw ay risk-averse investor, no, kung ito yung ito yung characteristic mo as an investor, no, so ang investor more on concern dun sa alternative maturity. Teka lang, di ba? Teka lang. Ano ba yung alternative maturity? Baka naman pwede ko makita. Baka naman maganda yung option na yan. Okay? So attitude, no? Ang attitude to risk may generate preferences for either short or long maturity. Ito yung sinasabi nating option. If such, no, kung ito yung case or ito yung scenario na sinasabi natin, yung term structure of interest rates would reflect risk premium. Ito yung pinakabayad sa atin kasi nga we take the risk. So yun yung sinasabi natin, risk premium. Okay? Tuloy ko lang ulit. If an investment is close to maturity, may little risk of capital loss. Bakit? It would arise from interest rate changes. Okay? A bond, example, a bond with a distant maturity would suffer considerable capital loss in the event of a large rise in interest rate. The risk of such losses is known as capital risk. Okay? Kung ang investor class, no, they have a preference, kung halimbawa predictability ng interest receipts, kita mo na di ba? But of course, the investors would require a higher rate of interest. Saan? Pwede siya sa short-term investment. Paano? Para of course, ma-compensate, di ba? Parang mabayaran o mabalik yung income risk ko na na-pay. This would then, no, ito yung the result would be to cause the yield curve to be inverted. So pag sinabing inverted, again, it's downward sloping na. Okay? Some investors may prefer long maturity investments. Bakit? Because they provide greater certainty of income flows. This uncertainty is income risk. If investors have a preference for predictability of interest receipts, of course, they may require a high rate of interest on short term. To compensate again for income risk, this would tend, nabasa ko na pala to, sorry class, dalawa lang pala to. This would tend to the inverted downward sloping. Okay. The effects on the slope of the yield curve from factors such as capital risk and income risk are in addition to the effect of expectations of future term interest rates. Kung ang money market participants are expecting short-term interest rates to rise, the yield curve would tend to be upward sloping. If the effect of capital risk were greater than the effect of income risk, the upward slope would be steeper. Pwede siyang maging sharper. Okay? If market expectations were that short-term interest rates would fall in the future, downward sloping naman ang makikita natin as yield curve. A dominance of capital risk aversion over income risk aversion would render the downward slope less steep or possibly turn a downward slope in the upward slope. Okay. Next is liquidity premium theory. Pangalawa itong theory. Some investors may prefer to own shorter rather than longer term securities. Why? Because short-term maturity represents greater liquidity. Mas madaling i-convert into cash. So, in this scenario class, itong mga investors na to, very willing silang i-hold, no? Yung long-term securities mas maganda. Kung long-term securities only, and only, may case tayo dito, may premise again, if they are compensated with a premium for the lower degree of liquidity. So, ibig sabihin class, ang mga long-term securities like bonds, no, halimbawa, pag sinabing long-term, ang example dito, bonds to class A, na pwede kang bayaran, no, you will be paid back in 15 years or more, no. So, yung mga long-term securities, pwede siyang i-liquidate prior to maturity. In effect, so paano yun ma'am? Wala pang maturity hindi pa nagma-mature. But in effect, their prices are more sensitive to interest rate movements. So pag sinabi namang short-term securities class, these are usually considered to be more liquid, mas madaling mako-convert sa cash. Bakit? Because they are more likely wala masyadong loss sa value because we are dealing with the short-term securities. Ibig sabihin, class, no? With the considerations of long-term and short-term securities, there is a liquidity premium for less liquid securities. Of course, it would change over time. Okay? Ano ba ibig sabihin ng security class? Pag sinabing security, it applies to types of investment na pwede siyang fungible and negotiable. Katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, example niyan, pwede tayong may bonds, pwedeng mutual funds, pwedeng stocks, pwedeng stock options, and exchange-traded funds. Pag sinabi namang liquidity premium, again, katulad ng risk premium, ang liquidity premium ay, of course, it compensates the investors. Bakit? Anong babayaran, pinakabayad sa kanila? Anong balik? Of course, kasi nag-invest sila sa securities na may mababang liquidity. At sinabi ulit liquidity, ulit-ulit ko lang class ha, it refers to how easily an investment can be sold for cash. Okay, so mako-convert agad-agad natin sa cash. Next, number 3. Wait lang ha. Number 3, we have the market segmentation theory. According to the market segmentation theory, interest rates for different maturities are determined independently of one another. Kasi nga segment, by segment tayo. The interest rate for short maturities is determined by the supply of and demand for shorter funds. Okay? So, isa-segment lang natin siya. No, it is independently, hindi siya correlated, wala siyang relationship, kumbaga. No? Long-term interest rates are those that equate the sums, no, that investors wish to lend long-term with the amounts that borrowers are seeking on a long-term basis. Kapag ito kapag pinag-usapan natin ang market segmentation theory, both investors and borrowers do not consider their short-term investments or borrowing as substitutes for long-term ones. Bakit? Kasi nga, they are independent, hindi sila nakadepende. Okay? So, makikita ninyo doon na walang considerations. Kung halimbawa ito ba short-term or borrowing as a substitutes for long-term ones, doesn't matter. Okay? Pag sinabing market segmentation theory, ito lang yung tatandaan natin, this lack of substitutability keeps interest rates of differing maturities independent of one another. Ibig sabihin, class, kung ang mga investors or borrowers, A2 and AB, 2A and 2B, kung ang mga investors or borrowers, pinag-uusapan natin, if they are considering alternative maturities as substitutes, pwede silang mag-switch between maturities. It doesn't matter. However, again, kung ang investors and borrowers naman ay nag-switch between maturities in response to interest rate change, what will happen? The interest rates for different maturities, they would no longer be independent of each other. So, an interest rate would change for one maturity and that would affect the demand and supply. And at the end of the day, yung interest rates makaka-apekto rin for other maturities. Okay? For the number 4 theory, we have the preferred habitat theory. Pag sinabing preferred habitat theory, class, this is a variation on the market segmentation theory. The preferred habitat theory allows for some substitutability between the maturities. This theory views that interest premiums are needed to entice investors from their preferred maturities to other maturities. On the other hand, class, itong sinasabi natin preferred habitat theory, ayan, tinitingnan nito, ang point of view ng preferred habitat theory is yung interest premium, kailangan siya to entice investors para ma-encourage natin ang investors from their preferred maturities to other maturities. So, ang ginagamit dito sa preferred habitat theory is the interest premium. And according to the market segmentation and preferred habitat explanations, government can have a direct impact on the yield curve. Governments borrow by selling bills and bonds of various maturity. Kung ang gobyerno ay maghihiram ng by selling long-term bonds, of course, the government will push up long-term interest rates. And of course, magiging effect nito ay yung yield curve ay magiging upward sloping. If the borrowing were at the short maturity end, what will happen to the short-term interest? Of course, it would be pushed up. Okay? Tapos na ba? Ay, sorry. Tapos na pala ako, class. Ayan. Okay. For the learning activity for Module 2 class, you have to check kung ano na yung most recent rate change ng mga nandito. European Central Bank, US Federal, Bank of England, Central Bank of Lithuania, Central Bank of Latvia, and Central Bank of Estonia. Compare nyo siya. So ano yung pwede ninyong, ano yung tawag din what are the conclusions? Anong makikita ninyo? I-assess ninyo. Ano yung mga interest rate nila? So, sino yung pinakamataas? Sino yung mahababa? Pero class, if I may kindly request, no, tingnan ninyo yung, halimbawa, kunyari lang ha, may 2022 ngayon na latest na publish for the interest rate. And then yung sinundan niya na interest rate. Let's check, tingnan natin, sino yung pinakamataas, gaano percentage ang itinaas, for example, ng US Fed, di ba? Or ng Bank of England. And then, you have to compare and contrast ninyo yung mga interest rate ng mga nakalagay dito. Okay? And then, I'm giving you option. Gusto nyo ba it's individual or i-grupo natin itong activity na to?
Group po.
Ayan, group na lang. Na okay lang? Okay lang sa inyo? I-group na natin?
Ma'am, sino po pipili ng mga group?
Ayun na. Okay lang bang kayo? O ako ba?
Ilan pong members?
Ilan kayo, class? Ilan ba kayo? Teka lang ha. Pwede bang kayo na lang ang mamili kung ilang grupo kayo? Basta kailangan yung isa, hindi pwedeng yung isa ay mawala. Alam niyo yon? Kasi gusto ko sana ay lahat kayo ay may activity. So gawan natin ng paraan. But of course, kung hindi naman tumulong, ay syempre wag niyo ilagay. Ha? Okay lang bang halimbawa ay tig sa 7? Class.
Ma'am, ano po, 22 po kami yatang BSMA 2B. So, kahit po 3 grupo na lang po kami or
Yes, oo. 3 grupo kayo, class, pero class yan ay ire-report nyo sa akin ha. May magre-report na isa. Halimbawa, sa 3 grupo, 3 ang magre-report. Mag-share, kumbaga, kung ano ang kanilang nakita, ano ang kanilang assessment. Okay? Pwede ba?
Okay lang po.
Okay lang, oo naman. Kasi ipapasok ko yan sa recitation ninyo. Ha? Okay? Meron pa ba akong tanong? And then, class, ire-report nyo yan next meeting. Gusto nyo ngayon na? Ha? I'm giving you kahit 20 minutes to check. Balikan nyo ako mamaya. Pwede ba? Plus. Or assignment na lang next meeting. Magre-report kayo sa akin. Sige, bigyan ko kayo ng option.
Ma'am, pwedeng assignment na lang po kasi wala pa rin po kaming groupings.
Okay, sige. Cherry, salamat. Ikaw yung pinakamatapang sa inyo, no? Nasagot. Thank
Ay,
you.
hindi na.
Hindi pala pinakamatapang. Ikaw may pinakamalakas ng loob. Ano? Thank you. Thank you for speaking in behalf of your class. Okay lang. Walang problema. Bibigyan ko kayo ng option kung saan kayo okay. Ha? Walang problema. So, ibig sabihin, next meeting, class next meeting is, ano ba? Pwedeng Friday. May utang kasi ako kay Sir Kenneth by Saturday. May magkaklase siya. Bibigay ko naman yung oras niya. Oras ko sa kanya. No? Okay? So, pwede bang by Friday, we'll be having a synchronous class again, discussion?
Opo, ma'am.
Yes po.
Yes, kasi we only have class for your information. Ay, teka lang. Pwede ko bang i-ano na to? Wait lang ha. Teka, tapusin ko lang muna to. So, for the next meeting, you'll be reporting. I-report nyo lang naman. 3 lang naman yon. Pero doon sa isang section, of course, meron pa rin reporter doon. Walang walang mali. But then, kailangan ko pa rin nung copy, nung report. Submit nyo again sa akin. Andyan naman sa slide presentation. Naka-present pa ba ako?
Opo, ma'am.
Yes po.
Yes po, ma'am.
Then, thank you. And then, i-email nyo sa akin. Huwag nyo kakalimutan yung mga pangalan ng grupo ninyo. Ha, mga pangalan, yung members ng group. Para mabilis anong tawag dito? Para mabilis akong mag-check. Okay? Ha?
Opo, ma'am.
Okay. Maliwanag tayo dito ha, nakalagay naman itong instruction doon sa module ha. Wait lang. Stop sharing ko muna ha. Okay. Another one, class. I would like to apologize pala kasi nag-set ako ng 5 o'clock, di ba? Tama ba? Nag-set ako nung ngayon, no? Kaya lang, class, wait lang ha. Yan. Nag-set kasi ako ng 5 o'clock class. Kaya lang nandito kasi ako dito sa Tanawan City College. Bakit? Gusto ko lang malaman ninyo yung reason bakit ako late ng 30 minutes sa inyo. Ano? Kasi class we are preparing for a limited face-to-face classes. Alam niyo naman yan. May possibility tayo na magkaroon talaga ng limited face-to-face classes at pine-prepare na natin ang mga facilities dito sa Tanawan City College. As of this moment, meron tayong lima na classroom na may mga acrylic na. So, ibig sabihin, pag sinabing acrylic, may mga cubicle na. No, yung per classroom, meron tayong 4 na panel na may tiga-4 na cubicle. So, tama ba? Yeah, tama. So, magiging 16. 16 ang pwedeng capacity. 16 na bata ang pwedeng maging capacity noong isang classroom. But then 15 lang talaga ang required. Ano? So meron na tayong 5. We are expecting na magkaroon pa tayo ng 42. 20 pa lang yung nandyan na panel. May iniintay pa kaming another 12 panels na. No? So more or less, we are hoping na lahat ng kwarto malagyan na ng acrylic. No? So yun, kaya ako late kasi kailangan kong tingnan yung mga nasa taas kasi hindi taga City Hall Plus yun, supplier lang. So nagkakabit sila doon ng mga aluminum and then ikinakabit nila yung acrylic. Kaya lang pag hindi mo nakita, syempre, di ba pag may pinagpapagawaan kayo sa bahay, pag hindi nyo nakita, hindi na monitor, hindi nyo na malalaman kung tama yung inilagay. No, makikita nyo na may problema kung hindi na ninyo na check mabuti yung pagkakagawa class. Okay? So we are hoping na sana magkaroon na tayo ng limited face-to-face. However, class, yung limited face-to-face natin, ay hindi siya 100%, kaya nga limited. It is based on laboratory, syempre kung sino may laboratory o yung major, pero yung Gen Ed, hindi ko, ako personally, hindi ko nakikita na mag-face-to-face. Unless may request si professor na, teka lang, gusto ko makita yung mga estudyante ko. Once in a while, gusto ko makita yung estudyante ko. And of course, depende rin yun sa scheduling na gagawin ng academic affairs. Every 2 weeks, yun yung napapag-usapan namin, but it's not yet final. Every 2 weeks, may panibagong schedule. No? And of course, kung kayo ay pupunta dito, kailangan meron pa rin tayong appointment system. Meron tayong pick-up time system. Hindi ko lang alam kung naka-post sa FB ng Tanawan City College. Paki-double check na lang. Kung hindi man, inform nyo ako para masabi natin kay MIS. May MIS tayo dito na i-upload or ipakita sa Moodle man lang at saka sa FB at saka sa website. Yun siya. Okay? And then, wait lang ha, class, wait lang. And then, saglit ha, pinapag-usapan natin before, yung paano, wait lang, present ko lang ha. Paano tayo magsasubmit, Paano tayo magsasubmit ng mga activity, As I recall, class, wait lang, kita nyo? Kita nyo ba?
Opo, ma'am.
Yes po, ma'am.
Ayan. As I recall na napag-agrihan natin, class, ang pakiusap ko lang, kahit hindi every week or every 2 weeks kayo magsasubmit, ang pakiusap ko lang, class, is for the tawag doon, week bago mag-midterm or bago mag-final exam, bibigay nyo na sa akin yung inyong mga activity. Okay lang naman, kahit malate ng kaunti, okay lang. Mas okay lang sa akin, hindi ako magtatampo kung mauna yung accounting. no? Kasi class ako ay accounting student dati. Sa totoo lang, no? Frustration ko maging CPA. Bakit hindi ako nakapag-CPA? This is a trivia lang. Ano, so may interesado lang naman. Kasi class ako ay alam niyo yung nahira? Alam niyo yung nahira?
Yes po.
Nahira? Nag-enjoy sa pagiging officer. President ako ng ganitong club, president ako ng ganitong, halos lahat ng organization sa Letran, it's either president ako, vice president, secretary, accountant, treasurer. Lagi akong officer. Kaya lang, no, nung ako ay, actually, napabayaan ko yung aking mga klase kasi lagi akong extracurricular activity. Nung sinabi sa akin ng accounting teacher ko, sabi niya, Miss Pablo kasi ako nung dalaga ako, Miss Pablo, ano bang priority mo? No, ikaw ba ay mag-officer na lang o ikaw ba ay magiging CPA? Kaya lang, napahiya kasi ako sa klase. So pagbalik ko, umalis ako ng classroom, pagbalik ko, may dala na akong shifting form. No? So yun, nag-shift na ako. So yun, sana hindi ko pala tinrate siya as personal yung sa sinabi ng teacher ko. Sana tinrate ko siya as concerned siya sa akin. Sana CPA ako ngayon. But nevertheless, class, no? Ang pinupunto ko is okay lang sa akin na hindi every 2 weeks kayo mag-submit. Kasi nga, you are preparing yourself para maging CPA. Gusto ko maging CPA kayo. No, kaya nga kayo naging BSMA, di ba? Kasi meron kayong goal na maging BS or CPA, di ba? So yun. So ang pakiusap ko lang, class, a week before the midterm, ibigay nyo na naman sa akin, ha? Ibigay nyo sa akin yung activity at saka yung learning journal. Ha? Ibig sabihin, ma'am, paano po, halimbawa, example lang, class, ha? Ma'am, ngayon lang po ako gagawa. Okay lang, walang problema. Okay lang gumawa ngayon. Walang problema sa akin. Ma'am, pwede bang isang file na lang, dire-diretso, from activity 1 hanggang activity 4 or activity 3? Kung ano matapos natin. Yes, it's fine with me. Mas madali ako mag-check. Ma'am, nagawa ko na po iba-ibang file name. Kasi sabi niyo dun sa file, dun sa instruction, ilagay ko po doon. Masunurin ako. It's okay din lang. Walang problema. Okay? Kaya lang kasi kino-consider ko, class, yung isang file name kasi minsan intermittent yung ating internet. Diba? Yung connection. So, minsan may nasisend, kaya lang yung iba hindi nasisend. Pero kung isang file name lang yun, nako-consider ko rin naman isang file name, mas okay kung isang senda na lang, lalo na kung mahirap ang internet connection. Ma'am, paano po yung learning journal? Kung ang learning journal ninyo, kung gusto nyo, isang file name na rin lang, pero nandun lahat, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, depende ulit sa matapos natin, okay rin lang. Ma'am, different file name, okay din po ba? Okay din lang. Okay, walang problema. As long as may isubmit kayo sa akin, okay yon. Please be reminded, yung learning journal ninyo ay 60%. Ha? Tawag doon. Huwag na kayong, may malimutan na kayo doon sa activity 1 to 3 or 1 to 4 kasi 20% lang yun. Pero hindi ko tinatawaran yung 20% class, ha. Huwag lang yung learning journal. May isa kayong maiwan doon ay napakasakit kapag kayo ay, kapag ako'y nag-compute. Bakit, class? Class, kasi pag midterm period, and this applies to all courses, ha? Pag midterm period, wala kayong incomplete. Hindi nyo na mahahabol ang grade sa midterm period. Bakit? Kasi class, gustuhin ko man i-adjust yung midterm grade ninyo, hindi namin magagawa. Bakit? Nakalock kasi yung midterm dun sa grading sheet. Naiintindihan nyo ako? Ha?
Yes po, ma'am.
Yes po, ma'am.
Thank you. Doon lang ako pwedeng kami mag-incomplete sa finals. But syempre, of course, mas maganda, meron na kayong, puhunan, may ipon na kayo sa midterm. Kung sakasakalit magkaroon ng concern, mas maraming requirements sa finals, at least may ipon na kayo. Okay? And as part of the monitoring, ito kasi yung lagi-lagi kong inibibigay, no? Ito yung lagi-lagi kong pinakikita or nire-require sa lahat ng estudyante ko, class. Ito yung midterm, isa sa midterm requirements natin. Ito lang naman, ang pandagdag bukod dun sa activity and learning journal. Pagbigyan nyo na ako dito kasi para sa inyo ito. No? Nakalagay dyan, class, as a student of ACCT 17. Pasa nyo ba?
Yes po.
Yes po, ma'am.
Of academic year 2021-2022, You are directed to comply and forward all the requirements needed. For your guidance and reference, you are required to fill in the necessary information on the table presented below. Bakit? Ba't natin nilagay ito? Kasi, class, para ma-monitor ninyo, this might help you in identifying if you miss one or two activity. So, meron tayong deadline. Inuunahan ko na kayo, class, ha? On or before March 28 at 12 ng tanghali. Okay? Isasend nyo lang naman sa akin sa email, ha? Sa email na, please, para kita ko agad, ha? So, your name and then your section. Makikita nyo dyan yung topic, class. Ayan, for module 1, may topic 1. May topic tayo for module 2, 3, and 4. Okay? So, nature of activity. Activity 1, may nakalagay din individual learning journal. Ilalagay nyo, date submitted, kailan nyo sinubmit. Para makita nyo, class. Kasi minsan baka akala nyo na-send na. Yung pala hindi na-get through. Di ba? Kasi nag-hang o kaya naibalik. Parang, anong tawag doon? Nag-bounce back sa email ninyo o kaya hindi talaga na-send. Di ba makikita natin? So, lagay nyo date submitted. Means of submission, class. Class, ang ibig sabihin ng means of submission, ilagay nyo dyan kung ano yung email na ginamit ninyo. Kung PM yan, lagay nyo PM kasi may pagkakataong hindi talaga may mga na-encounter ako, class, na hindi talaga nakakapag-email. Diba? So, sayang yung data. Naiintindihan ko yun. Ilagay nyo PM sa Facebook. Ano yung, ano tawag doon? Ano yung account name ninyo? Huwag namang Korean, ha? Huwag namang anime. Please lang. Okay? Kung email naman siya, ilagay niyo yung email address na pinagsendan ninyo, yung ginamit ninyong email. Kasi minsan, uulitin ko, may ginamit na isang email tapos na-block, nalimutan ng password, tapos iba naman yung ibinigay sa akin dito means of submission, hindi ko makikita. Okay? Naiintindihan, class?
Opo.
Okay.
Yes po, ma'am.
So yung midterm exam ninyo, class, hindi ko pa siya ibibigay, of course, syempre naman, hindi pa naman tapos tayo. But for your midterm exam, madali lang siya, hindi ko kayo pwedeng pagsauluhin. Hindi pwede. I preferred na wag kayo magsaulo. Hindi na. Kasi it's more on application, no? Dadaan ang panahon na talagang application na. Kung sinaulo nyo siya, after 1 sem, hindi nyo na yan tanda. Sigurado ako, kahit ako. No? Pag sinaulo ko siya, hindi ko natanda. Unless i-apply ko siya. For midterm, I am contemplating kung gagawa kayo ng video, no? Nung lahat ng natutunan ninyo, for the 4 modules or 3 modules, or gagawa na lang kayo ng PowerPoint presentation. So, walang dapat magkatulad dyan kasi that's your learning dun sa 4 or 3 module. Yun lang. Wala kayong sasauluhin, hindi tayo mag-e-exam, hindi kayo pupunta dito para mag face-to-face exam. Naintindihan niyo ako? Okay ba yun? O gusto niyo ng exam? As in written?
Ma'am, mas okay na po yun. Salamat po.
Kaya nga. Mas okay din sa akin yan, ha? Kasi pagka ganun, anong tawag doon, mga learnings ninyo, sasabihin nyo lang naman through module, through PowerPoint or video, no? Wala namang mali doon. Hindi ko naman pwedeng malian yung natutunan nyo. Tama ba ako?
Yes po, ma'am.
So mas malaki yung chance na mas mataas yung maibigay ko sa inyo. No, hindi ko naman sinasabi na so-so lang yung gagawin natin, but then of course, hindi naman kayo pwedeng gumawa ng video or PowerPoint ang hindi ninyo nakita at nabasa yung mga modules natin. Di ba? Tama ba?
Yes po, ma'am.
Okay. Unless gusto niyo talaga may magre-request, halimbawa Sir Hermie, gusto niya ay lahat kayo ay naandito, katulad ni Sir Mike, ang exam niya ay sa taas. Gusto niyo ba yan? Walang umiimik, ha? So, okay na tayo. Sundo tayo, ha? It's either video or a PowerPoint presentation. Sundo tayo doon.
Yes po, ma'am.
Yes po, ma'am.
Sige. Okay. May question kayo doon sa activity 1, 2, and 3? Yung 3 natin, class, ay, ano ba ang 3? Check ko lang, ha? Wait lang, check ko lang, ha? Second sem nga pala tayo. 3, For module number 3, next week, we'll be having, of course, yung reporting ninyo. And madali lang naman yung reporting. Wala pang 10 minutes yun. Tapos na tayo doon. Plus, itong module 3, ipe-prepare ko para makapag-klase tayo. Actually, okay na siya. No? Kaya lang, ayoko nang ma-overload information kayo. Overloaded kasi baka hindi nyo rin mag-grasp yung sasabihin ko. So, for module 3, check ko lang ha. Ayan. Identify na explain nyo lang. It's more of essay again. Explain the money markets and structure and identify nyo lang kung sino yung mga money market participants. Yun lang. Yun lang yung module 3 requirement. For module 2 naman, it's more of yung essay, di ba? For module 1, yun yata yung marami. Class now. So, just in case, isend nyo na lang sa akin. Kung may tanong kayo, PM nyo na lang ako. Okay? Any concern?
Ma'am,
Yes.
hihingi lang po sana ako ng permission para po kung pwede pong ipaprint yung modules nyo. Nahirapan po kasi ako magbasa sa cell.
Class, okay lang. Sa inyo na yan. Nakapublish naman yan. Kung anong gawin nyo, okay lang. Saan ka ba magpiprint dito ba? Hindi ko alam kung pwede magprint dito. O sa inyo, okay lang naman. Saan ka ba magpiprint? Basta printed hard copy. Tama ba?
Ma'am, sorry po nawala po ako.
Ulit. Ang nire-request mo ay kung pwedeng nakaprint. Di ba?
Ipiprint po, opo. Ipapaprint ko po.
Okay lang. For your consumption, okay lang.
Opo,
Kasi-
salamat po.
Kasi class, may tao kasi, in fairness din, may tao kasing pag binabasa, yung ina-highlight, di ba, tas nag-note taking, okay yun. Ganun din ako before. No? So, okay lang yan kasi as long as sa inyo na yan at your own face naman tayo. Actually, lagi sinasabi ng Academic Affairs, ni Vice President Dr. Hoveliano, class na yung Zoom, yung Google Meet, yung synchronous class, it's just a bonus. Bonus siya. Hindi kasi kami required class talaga na magklase. But then again, yung iba kasi mga professors talagang komportable mag-discuss. Kasi nga, no, at least once in a while, nakikita natin ang isa't isa kahit sa video call lang or sa Zoom lang. Okay? Any concern pa?
Ma'am, may date na po ang midterm.
Ang midterm natin, class, di ba ngayon ay third module 3? Di ba? Dapat module 3 na. So, wait lang ha. Ang bagal kasi ng laptop ko. Dito ako sa desktop. Ang module 3 ay March 7 hanggang March 19. Tingnan niyo yung mga kalendaryo niyo, class. Tapos, ang module 4, no, ay March 21, class, hanggang April 2. Okay, gets nyo? O na-note nyo na ba? Note taking, please. Ayan. After ng April 2, class, wait lang ha. Ayan. After ng April 2, April 4 na. So, itong week na to, April 4 to 9, ito na ang alam kong midterm exam. Okay? Kasi 8 weeks to After 8 weeks, ang 9th week natin ay midterm exam. For the midterm exam, class, ang midterm exam ay exam week. Hindi ito nagkaklase ha. Walang magkaklase dapat. No, kasi nga exam. So, don't expect your professors na makapag-Zoom class or Google Meet class kasi ito ay kailangan kayo ay nag-aaral dito. At wala tayong activity for this week. Yung sinasabi ko, not this week, itong exam week na April 4 to 9. So, paghandaan nyo na yung class. Okay? Depende sa professors kung magpapapunta, syempre ipapapaalam nyo sa academic office or naka-synchronous or depende. Or naka-application lang or sa model mismo kayo mag-e-exam, may quiz doon, may question doon, tapos naka-time pressure kayo. Di ba may ganon? Yun. Merong ganong option ang mga professors ninyo. So sa akin, parang mas okay, the best na yung ibinigay kong option para kayo ay makapag-exam sa financial markets. Fair enough na yun sa akin. At sa inyo, of course. Okay? Okay, class?
Apo, ma'am.
May tanong kayo dito isesend ko na ba ito agad-agad? Ano to ha? Naka-word to. Iwa-word ko to para ma-edit ninyo. Ha?
Ma'am, excuse po, may tanong lang po.
Yes, please. Sige.
Yung pong, di ba, yung i-report po namin sa Friday, yung para po sa module 2, di ba,
Yes.
sabi niyo po ay ipapasa rin po yung soft copy po ng report po.
Oo, yun.
Bali yung magpapasa po nun ay isa na lang po sa grupo, tapos nandun na po, okay, thank you.
Oo, isa na lang sa grupo. Tapos, anak, ganito ha, teka. Halimbawa, di ba module 2 yung pinag-uusapan natin? Doon sa activity, di ba activity 1 yon, di ba?
Apo.
So, kailan sinubmit? Tapos, means of submission, sino halimbawa, kunyari ikaw yung leader, no? E di yung ilalagay mo dito, yung iyong email address. Sa lahat ha, halimbawa, 7 tayo, kunyari, si Lawrence, si Cherry, si Hermie, si Christine, si Jason, at saka si Kate Ann. Halimbawa, tayong lahat, no? So, halimbawa, ang nagpasa, kunyari, ay si Christine, so email ni Christine. Doon sa ating lahat, doon sa module 2, activity 1, email ni Christine. Gets nyo?
Opo, thank you po.
Yes po, ma'am.
Thank you sa
Yes po,
question.
ma'am.
Naliwanagan. Okay? Any more? May tanong pa?
Ma'am, okay lang po kayang naka-PDF po yung mga documents na isa-send namin po sa inyo? Yung mga, sige po, salamat.
Oo naman. Hindi ko naman yan ini-edit. Actually, class, yan ay halimbawa lang ha. Kami kasi ay may reporting din. For the information of everybody, baka kasi hindi nyo alam. Meron din kami mga deadline. Katulad nyo, may deadline din kami. Gine-graded din kasi kami dyan. Kapag naman, halimbawa, ito, kunyari tayo, nagkaklase, di ba, nagpapa-open kami ng video. Pwede bang stop share ko na muna? Ha? Para kita ko kayo lahat. Dito pala. Nalilito tuloy ako. Dalawa nga pala to. Okay. Ano nga sinasabi ko? Ayun. Di ba nagpapa-open kami ng video? So here, may reporting din kasi kami, class. Pinopost din namin doon sa, meron kasi kami tinatawag na daily accomplishment report. Ibig sabihin ng daily accomplishment report, kung anong ginawa mo doon sa oras ng, anong oras ng klase mo, ilalagay mo, ido-document mo. Halimbawa, paggawa namin ng module, pag-check namin class ng, anong tawag doon, ng mga activity nyo, paggawa namin ng PowerPoint, pag-check namin ng learning journal, ano pa ba, pagkaklase, pero yung klase kasi na ganito, synchronous, hindi siya mandatory. Ulit-ulitin lang natin. But then, nakalagay din yun. So kung anong lahat ng ginawa namin, pino-forward namin yun, naka-document yun, pino-forward namin lahat yun kay Academic Affairs. Tapos si Academic Affairs, chinecheck yun kung tama, kung ang module namin ay maayos, diba ganun, kung nasusunod ba yung mga question doon ay related ba doon sa pinag-aralan, may ganon. And then, dadalhin yun sa amin, sa admin, ako kasi yung head ng admin, para mapasweldo namin ng maayos ang faculty. So, doon kami naman ang gagawa ng payroll. So, kung sala ang DAR, daily accomplishment, may DTR, daily time record, katulad nyo rin. Tapos may mga attachment kami, may picture, saka pa namin dadalhin yun sa City Hall. So yun, saka kami makakasweldo. So kung kayo ay may deadline, may mga format, yun yung pinupunto ko, kami din meron. So tulungan tayo kasi kami ay kailangan din magpasa. No? Kailangan din namin magbigay ng mga accomplishment. No? So maunawaan ninyo, class, na kung kayo ay late na, for example, no? Kung late na, nang magpasa at deadline na, hindi na namin siya maihahabol. Ulitin ko, pag sinabing midterm, walang incomplete. Kaya nga as early as now, ay talagang sana makapagbigay kayo sa akin ng kumpleto man lang para may puhunan tayo for midterm. Midterm grade is 40% and ang ating final term is 60%. Okay? May tanong pa? Question? Class? Question? Question, clarification? Wala na? Nandiyan pa kayo?
Dito pa po.
Okay, sige. Kung wala na, please pa-open naman. Speaking of, paki-open naman ang inyong mga video. Ayan. Mabilisan lang para hindi sayang ang mga data nyo. Okay, smile class. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Ang ganda naman ni Dayan, oh. Dayan, kamusta ang business?
Okay lang po.
Wait lang ha, isa pa, isa pa. Last panel. Wait. Okay, goodbye, class. Thank you so much sa oras. Salamat.
Salamat po, ma'am.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Po.
Thank you po, ma'am.
Bye.